Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. I sat in the silence of my car, my head resting on the steering wheel. The stillness around me felt dense, almost heavy. Only a faint streetlight illuminated the interior, casting a cold, harsh glow over me. My eyes were red, and my cheeks were damp with tears that seemed unstoppable. I had tried to hold them back for so long, but they still found their way out. How did I end up here? It all happened so quickly and quietly that I didn't even notice how I'd stepped onto this slippery path. I looked in the mirror, trying to meet my own gaze, to see in it the woman I once took pride in. But looking back at me was someone else entirely, a woman confused and weighed down by guilt. Sadness and fear filled me, pressing an unbearable heaviness into my chest. All these emotions unraveled before me at once, taking me back to the day when Oliver and I first visited his father, Leon. Back then, I had no idea that this would mark the beginning of a path that would tear my heart apart and perhaps destroy everything I had. I was still trying to be a good wife, supporting Oliver in his demanding job, but my support felt mechanical. At home, I was alone, while his days and evenings were consumed by the office and reports. I was missing something essential, something more than just brief words and routine kisses. We arrived at Leon's on a cool, clear evening. Oliver's father's house was outside the city, surrounded by a tall, dense forest that gave the whole setting a certain separation from reality. The house radiated warmth, with details that stood out immediately: old wooden panels, hefty books on shelves, photographs from various corners of the world. But above all, there was Leon's presence. He was tall, reserved, and, unlike Oliver, emotionally open. We stood in the hallway, and he, looking at me, seemed to study every line of my face, every gesture. His gaze was too intense, almost scorching. I felt uneasy, but I was confused. Why did this man stir such strange feelings within me? Oliver didn't seem to notice anything unusual. He exchanged a few dry words with his father, but never once looked at me the way Leon did. I tried to look away, but every time I caught myself seeking his gaze again and again, and this moment between us grew even more tense. Later, left alone, I stepped out onto a small terrace of the house. The night was dark and cool, and I took a deep breath of fresh air, hoping to calm myself. My solitude didn't last long. I heard quiet footsteps, and turning around, saw Leon. His presence was both captivating and mesmerizing, and although I felt uncomfortable, I couldn't leave. He stopped nearby, saying nothing for a few seconds, then looked at me and asked, "Harper, are you happy?" His words took me by surprise. He looked straight into my eyes, not attempting to hide his sincerity, and somehow this stirred everything I had worked so hard to conceal. "What a strange question," I replied, trying to joke, but my voice betrayed me. "Not for someone who doesn't look happy." I lowered my gaze, afraid he would see everything I was trying to hide, even from myself. His honesty and attentiveness seemed to break apart the protective shell I had been building for years. I felt exposed, almost bare in front of him, and it was like a release, but also like a trap. Sometimes it's just hard to feel needed. And with Oliver. I broke off, realizing I had already said more than I intended. Leon nodded slightly, and in his eyes, there was something understanding, almost compassionate. We stood in silence, and the quiet between us grew deeper. It wasn't an emptiness, it was something alive, saturated with meaning and tension. At that moment, I didn't understand where such a conversation could lead, but it was the very small shift that would slowly set an avalanche into motion. Muted voices and dim lights reflected off the champagne glasses that waiters carried past the guests. It was one of those sophisticated, slightly stiff evenings where Oliver always felt at ease, fully absorbed in conversations about work and new projects. I, as always, stood a little apart, occasionally smiling and nodding as he exchanged handshakes and business cards. Once again, I was playing my usual role as the silent companion, supporting him with my presence, but nothing more. Sensing this somehow, someone approached from behind. I turned and met Leon's gaze. His presence was always unexpected, yet, as on that evening on the terrace, it stirred a strange mix of unease and attraction in me. Harper, standing in the shadows again? He smirked, his gaze carrying a hint of challenge. You know there's always someone more interesting here than me, I replied, trying to keep a light tone. I'd argue otherwise, he said, leaning slightly toward my ear. His voice was soft enough to go unheard by others, but strong enough to make me shiver. I offered a restrained smile, attempting to hide my sudden embarrassment. But he continued speaking, his words a subtle but undeniable flirtation I found hard to pull away from. Our conversations seemed to walk a fine line, touching on things I usually kept silent about. Leon, on the other hand, effortlessly sidestepped convention, and his eyes held that slight amusement that suggested he saw a side of me I let no one else see. At one moment, he seemed to touch my hand almost by accident, but very deliberately. His palm lingered on mine for just a second, but it was enough to leave me breathless. He leaned closer and whispered softly, "You're stunning, Harper." That shouldn't go unnoticed. His voice was gentle, yet there was an ambiguity to it that made my head spin. As if in a dream, I suddenly realized how close he was, his face nearer than acceptable at a business event. My mind desperately searched for a reason to stop, to pull away, but my body felt paralyzed. He leaned in barely an inch and gently touched my lips, as though letting himself cross a line for just a moment before pulling back. It happened so quickly, so carefully, that I barely had time to process it, but it was enough to feel a rush of warm, unsettling excitement wash over me. I couldn't stay near him a second longer. Without a word, I turned and quickly made my way to the exit, feeling as though the world had closed in around me. Once I was outside, I took a deep breath, my heart pounding wildly, unwilling to slow. It felt surreal, too reckless to be real, yet too powerful to erase from memory. Deep down, I knew I had crossed a line, and it couldn't be excused as a moment of weakness or a simple misunderstanding. When I returned home, I tried to convince myself that it needed to be forgotten. It was wrong, and I knew I was risking not only my relationship with Oliver, but my own sense of self. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to push thoughts of Leon away, his words, his touch, his gaze, all of it remained, embedding deeper into my consciousness like a splinter. Each attempt to forget, to see it as a passing moment, only had the opposite effect. My inner world, long concealed and stifled by my efforts to stay in control, felt on the verge of shattering. I was caught in a painful conflict between duty and desires I had never admitted, not even to myself. But one thing I knew for certain: I needed to avoid any further encounters with Leon. After that night, everything felt empty and lifeless. I tried to distract myself, to focus on little things, to reclaim my peace, but inside, like a burning ember, the memory of Leon's touch lingered. Oddly enough, that feeling only deepened the distance I'd started to feel with Oliver. I wanted to find that closeness with him again, the connection we'd lost long ago, but each attempt ended in disappointment. Recently, Oliver got a promotion, which only added to his constant preoccupation with work. Our conversations became brief, almost clipped, and I felt even more alone. That evening, sitting in the kitchen, watching him hurriedly scroll through his messages, I mustered the courage to speak. "Oliver," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "could we spend the evening together tomorrow? Just talk, like we used to." Without even looking up, he replied almost automatically, "Of course, but maybe not for too long. I have a lot of work, you know that." I felt my effort shatter against his indifference. A bitterness grew inside, and I realized that our relationship felt more like cohabitation than a marriage. Inside, a void grew, and every attempt to fill it met with failure. It was then that I began to question if Oliver and I had as much in common as I once believed. A few days later, Oliver suggested going to Leon's for a family dinner. At first, I tried to refuse, but he insisted, saying his father had been wanting to see us together for a long time, and I couldn't come up with a good reason to decline. I knew I would see Leon again, and that it would likely only complicate things. Yet, deep down, there was an unsettling mixture of excitement and anxiety. When we entered the house, I was enveloped by the familiar atmosphere, always cozy, yet slightly unsettling. Leon met us at the door, his gaze lingering on me a little longer than necessary, and I felt my heart tighten with hidden tension. The evening unfolded in a slow-paced conversation. Oliver talked about his achievements at work, his new responsibilities, and I realized how fully absorbed he was in his new status. I smiled, listened, but mostly remained silent, unable to find the right words. Leon, on the other hand, watched my every move closely, with a look that made me feel exposed. At one point, he leaned slightly toward me across the table and said, restrainedly, "Harper, I hope you still remember how nice it can be to get away for a few days and escape all this chaos." His words, outwardly innocent, carried a hidden meaning that only he and I could understand. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks and pretended not to hear. But Leon didn't take his eyes off me, seeming to enjoy how his words made me uneasy. Oliver, absorbed in his phone, noticed nothing, but I knew. This was a dangerous game. The entire evening felt like a blur. On the way home, I barely spoke to Oliver, lost in my thoughts. I needed to sort myself out, to understand what I felt and what to do next. Every attempt to find closeness with Oliver was met with his indifference, while with Leon, I only saw risk and uncertainty. The next day, I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Ellen for a few days. I needed time to think, to restore the boundaries I'd lost, and to decide what to do with this tangled mess of emotions and commitments. Ellen, as always, welcomed me with warmth and understanding, giving me the space to speak, without pushing for details. Yet, even away from home, I couldn't shake the persistent thoughts of Leon. As if confirming my unease, I soon received a message from him. "Harper, I'm sorry about the incident. I didn't mean to cause you any trouble." Those words made me feel his presence once again, and though I knew the message should have gone unanswered, that I should end all of this, the internal conflict pulled me back to the moment he first touched my hand. I stared at Leon's message for a long time, trying to decide what to reply. His apology, though formal, stirred a strange feeling in me, a mix of relief and unease. Part of me wanted to put an end to it, to forever stop this secret exchange, but another part, the one that only came alive around Leon, yearned to meet him. Too much had been left unsaid, unfinished. Finally, wrestling with my own contradictions, I agreed. We arranged to meet at the central square, a busy place where people often gathered. I was sure I'd be able to explain everything that had happened between us as a mistake, a fleeting madness we both had to forget. When I arrived, he was already there, in a simple dark jacket, his expression a bit frowning but composed. As soon as he saw me, Leon smiled, and in his gaze, I sensed a warmth that made me feel special again. "Harper," he said softly, extending his hand in greeting, and I couldn't suppress a slight shiver. We walked along the streets, and unexpectedly, he suggested heading to the old park by the river. It was quieter and more peaceful than the bustling center. I didn't object, and as we moved into the quiet lanes, our conversation naturally shifted to more personal topics. "Have you ever felt lonely, even when you're surrounded by people?" he asked suddenly, not looking at me, as if he were talking to himself. The question stopped me cold. It was exactly the feeling that had haunted me for the past few years. Caught off guard, I only nodded. I've thought a lot about how family, work, all of it matters, But somewhere between them, a person loses themselves. He glanced at me for a second, and there was an elusive sadness in his eyes. I often feel it, especially after the divorce. Loneliness becomes something familiar, but it doesn't go away. His words touched a part of me I had carefully hidden. I felt exposed, as if he saw right through me, knew all my secret fears and longings. And at that moment, I realized that to him, I was more than just his son's wife. "Leon," I said quietly, unsure of how to express the emotions overwhelming me. "I can't. This isn't right." "I know." He looked at me again, his gaze full of tenderness. "And perhaps that's why it's so hard for me to step back." His words were so simple and sincere that I felt all my inner barriers beginning to crumble. Everything I'd tried to suppress poured out. He reached out and gently touched my hand, his fingers warm and steady. That gesture was so light, yet somehow painfully significant. My heart was beating fast, and I knew I could no longer ignore what was happening between us. We sat down at a small riverside cafe, and I couldn't take my eyes off his face. He talked about his past, his separation from his ex-wife, the emptiness he felt despite being surrounded by family. And every glance, every word seemed directed at me in a way Oliver's hadn't been for a long time. At one point, he covered my hand with his again, and in that touch was the inevitability I couldn't fight. I realized that, for me, he had become more than just a father-in-law or a friend. It was inexplicable, absurd, but the warmth and kinship I felt with him consumed me completely. "Harper," he said, his hand still on mine. "Sometimes I think there could have been something more between us, if not for—" He didn't finish, but his gaze and gentle smile spoke all that was left unsaid. An inner dread overtook me, but at the same time, there was an incredible sense of freedom, as if this moment, this meeting, had given me a chance to experience something significant, though forbidden. I understood that I was standing on the edge of an abyss, yet I couldn't turn away from this feeling, this pull. The doubts that had recently tormented me began to dissolve, leaving only the desire to be near him, to understand him, and to find myself. A few days had passed since our meeting, but thoughts of Leon lingered, refusing to leave me. It felt as if an invisible thread had formed between us, one that couldn't simply be cut. It all began with short, almost innocent messages. "How are you?" Or, "How was your day?" I responded cautiously at first, but with each reply, my words grew warmer, and my heart raced more with each notification bearing his name. This exchange became something forbidden and thrilling for us both, a source of secret closeness that neither he nor I could afford in real life. I'd check my phone with a flutter of excitement, and his messages made me forget all my fears, if only briefly. I knew it was a dangerous game, but I couldn't walk away. Each brief phrase, each hint seemed to strengthen our hidden world, existing far from anyone else. One evening, while I sat alone in the living room, clutching my phone, a message from him appeared. "Harper, I can't stop thinking about you. I try, but it's no use." I reread those words again and again, realizing he wasn't merely flirting, but confessing his helplessness before the feelings we shared. Responding was difficult because I felt the same unbearable pull, yet I knew that replying would only draw us both closer to the edge. Meanwhile, Leon was beginning to feel guilty. He admitted it to me almost immediately. "Harper," he wrote, "I feel like a traitor to my son. But this connection with you, it feels like salvation to me. I can't explain it, but it's true. I saw him torn between his feelings for me and his loyalty to Oliver, yet unable to walk away. Each day brought us closer, and this led to inevitable lies. Soon, I began hiding my outings from Oliver. My excuses were meeting a friend, lunches, and coffee dates with Ellen, and although I initially felt anxious, the lies soon became a natural part of my life. Every time I spoke those words, I felt a painful pang of guilt, but when I looked into Oliver's eyes, I couldn't summon the courage to tell the truth. In the end, our marriage slipped into a silent crisis we failed to notice. Oliver was too engrossed in his work, absorbed in projects, and rarely coming home, while I was consumed by this secret connection with Leon, which had become my most cherished secret. And although my mind warned me of the danger, my heart couldn't break free from the pull that felt irresistible and all-consuming. That evening began as another step toward the abyss, though I hoped I could keep my composure. Leon had invited me over, and while I knew it was yet another breach of all boundaries, I couldn't refuse. Every moment with him pulled me in deeper, and the words left unsaid between us became a weight I could no longer ignore. And so I found myself at his door, hesitating, yet knocking all the same. When Leon opened the door, I saw something deeply personal, almost painful in his eyes. He seemed tense, but quickly invited me in. We walked into the living room, and he poured me a glass of wine, trying to mask his own unease. At first, we spoke of casual things, but soon the conversation took a serious turn. Leon looked down, as if gathering the courage for a confession, and then began to speak. You know, Harper, I rarely talk to anyone about my past relationships. Even with Oliver, I avoid those topics. But with you, I want to share. Maybe it's because you seem to understand loneliness. He looked at me, his eyes filled with warmth and hurt. I felt something inside me respond, as if each of his words brought us closer, revealing parts of himself hidden from others. My first love, he continued, was far from perfect. She always seemed unattainable, and when we parted, I couldn't recover for a long time. Even now, I sometimes drift back in my thoughts to those days. He paused, taking a sip of wine, avoiding my gaze. At some point, I realized that loneliness is a constant, that it would always be with me. Those words stirred a deep empathy within me. I knew what he meant. That fear of being alone was familiar, as was the painful desire to be understood. And as I listened to him, I realized he was revealing a part of himself that no one else had access to. What about Oliver? I asked suddenly, sensing something important between them. Leon sighed, seeming lost in thought. We've always had a complicated relationship. He tried to be someone I never was, he said, lowering his eyes, a hint of regret in his voice. We drifted apart, and now I feel more and more that he's become a stranger to me. His words struck me with their honesty and vulnerability. Leon, who had always seemed strong and confident, was opening up a different side of himself, and I saw a man struggling to find his way out of his own pain. Then he looked at me, his gaze softened, and he quietly said, Harper, you've become my salvation. The one who helps me not to feel this emptiness. You're not just my son's wife. You're something more. His words were like an electric shock. He looked at me with such tenderness that I couldn't resist. I felt my own defenses crumble, and, unable to hold back, I took a step closer. His lips touched mine, and in that moment, we both knew we had gone too far. But in that space, there was only us. Then he gently pulled back, as if suddenly realizing where this path might lead. I saw confusion in his eyes, mirroring my own state. This is wrong, I whispered, but my voice was uncertain. Leon lowered his gaze, nodding, and a shadow of pain crossed his face. But despite this, I could see that he, like me, wasn't ready to let go. On my way home, my thoughts raced. What had started as an attempt to find understanding had turned into something more, something dangerous and irreversible. I knew our feelings had spiraled out of control, that I couldn't stop this current. Yet, despite all my fears, I couldn't simply end these meetings. Each day, I began to understand more clearly that my meetings with Leon were not just a fleeting source of inspiration or temporary solace. They had become something much more, something I couldn't quite name, and perhaps didn't even want to. This connection was alive. It breathed, demanded attention, and consumed my thoughts. Feelings for him seeped into every moment of my life, every glance, every movement. For the first time in years, I felt alive. But this newfound sensation came with a dark shadow of anxiety. Oliver remained by my side, yet between us grew a widening chasm that I was unknowingly deepening with my own hands. Inside, a storm of contradictions raged. I found myself checking my phone multiple times a day, awaiting his messages, analyzing each word, every hint, every phrase, as if they contained an entire world. Leon's messages were brief, almost innocent, just a word or two, yet even these filled me with a warm wave, paired with a sharp pang of guilt. It was becoming harder and harder to be with Oliver, feeling this widening divide, though he seemed oblivious to any change. Finally, one evening, Leon invited me for a walk. I agreed, not thinking of the consequences, simply wanting to see him again, to hear his voice, to feel the comfort and closeness he brought. We met in the park, where the trees shielded us from prying eyes. Leon looked focused, even a bit serious, and as we walked, it felt like he was searching for the right moment to speak. "Harper," he said at last, stopping to look at me intently. "I've been thinking about this for some time. We both need a break, to escape from this chaos." I didn't immediately understand his meaning and remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Sensing my thoughts, he softly went on. "I thought, maybe we could spend a couple of days together, just away from everything?" His words lingered in the air, like a question I didn't know how to answer. My heart raced. The idea of going away with him felt forbidden, even impossible. Yet I was seized by a strange anticipation. Deep down, I knew that if I agreed, this trip would change everything. It would be a point of no return, where not only promises would be broken, but also the self-image I had so carefully constructed over the years. "You know this is impossible, Leon," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice betrayed me. He smiled, his gaze full of that same gentleness that made my heart stop every time. "Why impossible?" he asked, lightly holding my hand. "It's just a few days. We're not deceiving anyone, not hurting anyone, just wanting to be alone. You deserve this, Harper." His words imprinted themselves on my mind, a mixture of understanding and a desire to protect me from my own fears, perhaps even to justify them. I wanted to believe in them, but deep down, I knew the truth was different. I looked away, trying to hold back my emotions. "Leon!" My voice was barely a whisper. "I don't even know what to say. This feels so wrong." I felt as if I was doing something utterly forbidden. He nodded, his gaze fixed on me. "Understand me," he said, his voice softer, as if afraid of shattering the moment. "I know it's difficult. I feel it too, that somehow we're crossing a line. But Harper, with you, I feel like myself again. Maybe that's what these moments are for, to break away from routine, even if just for a while." I looked at him silently, seeing such sincerity in his eyes that I couldn't resist. His words sounded like a promise of a different world, a world with no place for anxiety, where everything was simple and honest. Yet despite all this, a fear crept over me, as if I were stepping onto an unfamiliar, dangerous path. "You do realize none of this will go unnoticed," I said, trying to pull myself back to reality. "This trip, it could change everything." He looked at me, his gaze full of both understanding and resolution. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently, looking away. "I just want you to know that with you, I am happy. And if you need me, I'm here, no matter what." His words stirred something inside me that I couldn't explain. Deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't just a passing attraction. Leon had become someone I couldn't ignore, and our meetings were more than a hidden intrigue. On my way home, I tried to collect my thoughts. Everything he had said sounded like a challenge to my notions of marriage, loyalty, and what it meant to truly be oneself. An uneasy feeling grew within me, accompanied by a quiet but steadfast certainty that I couldn't walk away. But that night, as I sat alone with my thoughts, I realized that each encounter, each conversation, was slowly dismantling the boundaries I had so carefully built around myself. That evening, Leon and I met in a small, cozy restaurant hidden away from the main streets. It had only a few tables, separated by thin partitions, and the dim light from the lamps created a calm, almost intimate atmosphere. I felt as if I'd stepped into another reality, one untouched by fear or doubt, only the warmth I felt in his presence. We chatted about trivial things, laughed, and for a few hours I forgot everything that could tear us apart. Leon looked at me with a tenderness and attentiveness that I so desperately needed, and I realized I had found a quiet refuge in him, a place where I could be myself. But at some point, I felt a sudden tension take hold of me. It was as if an invisible unease had settled in the air. I glanced around instinctively and saw Oliver entering the restaurant. My heart stopped, and I quickly looked away, praying he wouldn't notice us. But despite my efforts to remain inconspicuous, his gaze had already landed on us. Oliver seemed stunned to see his father and his wife together, especially here, in such a secluded spot. Leon noticed my unease and turned around. I saw his expression change, but he kept his composure, trying to appear casual, as if it were merely a coincidence. He nodded at Oliver, who returned the gesture, but his gaze lingered on me, filled with suspicion and a growing anxiety. I felt myself shrinking inside, and for a moment, I wanted to vanish, to flee from this restaurant, but I knew that would only make things worse. "Harper, are you okay?" Leon asked softly, trying not to draw attention. I nodded, but the words were caught in my throat. Oliver didn't approach our table, but his presence was like thunder in a clear sky, a harbinger of the storm I'd feared for so long. I couldn't bring myself to relax, though Leon tried to draw us back into the conversation, lightly touching my hand in an attempt to comfort me. After a few tense minutes, Oliver turned and left without a word. But as he walked out, he paused at the door, casting one last, questioning glance that left me feeling drained and defeated. When I returned home, I was overwhelmed by the guilt and dread I had tried so hard to suppress. I struggled to remain calm, but I knew there would likely be no way to explain this to Oliver. I sensed that his suspicions were now confirmed. My hands shook as I unlocked the door, and a feeling of foreboding grew within me. This was only the beginning of the end. Later, when Oliver came home, he looked grim and withdrawn. He walked silently into the bedroom, where I sat waiting, unsure of how to meet his gaze. It seemed like he had words caught in his throat, as if he wanted to ask something but didn't know where to begin. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough and restrained. "I saw you with my father today." Those words felt like a blow. I tried to keep my composure, hoping I could somehow deflect the conversation, but he continued, giving me no time to respond. "I could understand if you met him for a matter of business, or just to chat, but why such a secluded restaurant? Why did it look like you were hiding something?" His gaze, full of doubt, darted across my face, searching for any clue. I froze, and my words felt foreign when I attempted to reply. "Oliver, it was just a coincidence. We just met for lunch, nothing more." But I could see he didn't believe me. My lie sounded so unconvincing that I surprised myself for even trying to say it. In his eyes, I saw confusion and a hidden pain. "Harper, are you sure?" His voice was so quiet it sounded as if he were speaking more to himself than to me. "Maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems like there's something going on between you." I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. The guilt I had tried so hard to bury surged within me with renewed force. I knew I needed to explain, to end this, but the words wouldn't come. No, Oliver, you've misunderstood. Between us, I trailed off, realizing I didn't even believe what I was saying. In response, he merely nodded silently, but I could see distrust building within him. He left the room, leaving me alone, and in that moment, I felt my entire world beginning to crumble around me. After the meeting with Leon at the restaurant, everything changed. I felt like we were trapped in a dead end, with no way out that wouldn't bring pain and loss. Each time we met, the sense of anxiety grew stronger, as if everything around us was closing in, leaving us no air to breathe. Now, every step we took, every word we said, every look we shared felt like the end of something familiar, and the beginning of something terrifying, uncontrollable. Leon understood that, sooner or later, our secret would come to light. Oliver had clearly begun to suspect something, and hiding our feelings was becoming more and more difficult. That day, when we met again, I noticed something new in his gaze, a kind of firm determination, bordering on despair. He took my hands, his eyes filled with care and concern. "Harper, we can't keep doing this anymore. I don't want to hide, avoid your husband, or live in fear." His voice trembled, and he gripped my hands even tighter, as if afraid to let go. "Let's leave, Harper. Leave everything and start a new life." I looked at him in shock, not knowing how to respond. His words shook me to my core, but I couldn't agree. Leon was ready to give up everything, even his own son, for this new, free life. But I wasn't ready to take that kind of risk. "Leon," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I I can't just leave Oliver. No matter how difficult it is, I can't destroy everything so easily." "But you're not happy with him, Harper. You know it yourself," he continued insistently. "I see it. You deserve something different. You deserve to live without hiding." His words were sincere, almost pleading, and it was unbearably painful to see the desperation on his face. I turned away, trying to hide my tears, but I knew he could see them, knew it hurt him to see my refusal. It was a turning point from which there was no going back. Since then, my worries intensified, as if every step I took was under scrutiny. Oliver became more wary, observant, and I noticed that he increasingly looked at me intently, studying me, as if trying to understand my inner turmoil. It seemed like every word, every lie, left a mark that he could no longer ignore. His gaze grew heavier, as if his suspicions were slowly but surely turning into certainty. "Harper, where have you been disappearing lately?" he asked suddenly one evening as I was about to leave. I froze, trying not to show the anxiety that gripped me. I... I'm meeting Ellen. She recently moved, and I'm just being there for her," I replied, trying to sound casual, but I felt as if he could sense my uncertainty. Oliver nodded, but I could see that it didn't put him at ease. On the contrary, a flicker of doubt and anger flashed in his eyes, anger he could no longer hold back. From that day on, I started noticing him watching me, scrutinizing my every step, and the tension grew with each passing day. One day, coming home earlier than usual, I found Oliver standing in the living room, holding my phone in his hands. He was reading one of my messages from Leon. I felt the world around me shrink to that single moment, and everything inside me collapsed. "What's this?" His voice was filled with restrained anger. "I tried for so long to ignore my suspicions, but now I have proof. You kept this from me, Harper, but I figured it out." My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. I knew I couldn't lie anymore, couldn't hide the truth. Everything I had tried to keep under control was falling apart before my eyes, and Oliver looked at me with such disappointment and hurt that I could hardly bear his gaze. "Oliver, please," I managed to say, but he cut me off before I could finish. "You cheated on me with my father. With him! How could you?" His voice shook with rage, and I saw how deeply my actions had wounded him. I couldn't respond. The words stuck in my throat, and I just stood there, realizing I had gone too far. Oliver looked at me, and I could see that his world, like mine, was crumbling. After the truth came out, everything around me crumbled like a house of cards. Every action, every lie, every moment of weakness led to devastating consequences, and now I had to face them. I knew that the attraction between Leon and me had made what happened inevitable, but with it came a painful realization. I couldn't continue living as if nothing had happened. Leon understood this too. Our meetings became rare, brief, and filled with the painful awareness of the hurt we had caused those we once loved and protected. The last time we met was in the same park where we had once grown close, and now that place felt soaked in our confessions, fears, and secrets that had become unbearable. "Harper," he began, sighing heavily and looking down. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it came to this. I I never wanted to destroy your life, your family." His voice was broken, and I saw in him the same pain I'd been hiding within myself. We stood opposite each other, separated not only by distance, but by the wall we had built ourselves. "Leon," I said, struggling to find the words. I I'm to blame too. I'm sorry it turned out this way, but it was a mistake. Maybe it was one from the start. We both knew this shouldn't have happened." He nodded, his gaze heavy and weary. This connection had brought us more pain than happiness, and despite all the warm moments, despite how I felt when I was with him, it was clear this had led to disaster. We stood in silence, and it felt as if our thoughts were blending into one. I knew this was goodbye, that we had nothing left to say to each other. "Goodbye, Harper," he finally said, not daring to meet my eyes. "Goodbye, Leon," I whispered in response, feeling the pain wash over me in waves. When I returned home, another pain awaited me. Oliver had already made his decision. He didn't want to discuss anything with me, didn't ask for explanations. He simply said it was over. Our conversation was short, curt, stripped of the love that had once held us together. I understood he would not forgive me, and he had every right not to. I had hurt him, struck him at his core, betraying him with his own father. For Oliver, this was not just infidelity. It was a betrayal he could not forget. "I filed for divorce, Harper," he said with icy calm, avoiding looking in my direction. "Our marriage is over. I don't want anything to do with you anymore." These words cut deep, leaving a painful scar on my soul. Oliver no longer saw in me the person with whom he had once tied his life. In his gaze, there was not only disappointment, but a deep bitterness, and I knew he had truly made up his mind. "Oliver," I tried to speak, but he stopped me with a gesture, unwilling to hear any more excuses or apologies. "You don't have to explain, Harper. I understand everything now and have suspected for a long time." I tried not to see it, convincing myself it was just jealousy, but the truth was right there. I kept my eyes closed too long, and that was my mistake. I was silent, realizing that any words would be pointless. Too much had happened, and our marriage was already shattered. After he left, silence filled the house, leaving me alone with a sense of loss and emptiness that wouldn't fade. It was not just the loss of Oliver, but a part of myself, a trust we had built over the years. I understood that I had done something irreversible, and now I had to live with that burden. And Leon, in the end, he was left alone, dealing with his own guilt. I heard he tried to mend things with Oliver, asking for forgiveness, but Oliver didn't want to see him anymore. His father had become a stranger to him, a consequence of our actions, our weaknesses, and our feelings. After Oliver left, leaving the house steeped in cold silence, I felt as if I were lost in an endless fog. Days blurred into a gray mass, devoid of meaning or purpose. My life, once filled with aspirations, desires, and routines, suddenly felt indifferent. I spent entire days alone, passively watching the hours slip by. It seemed as though I had lost touch with reality, as if something inside me had finally broken. The house, once a refuge where I felt safe, became a reminder of broken relationships, betrayal, and pain. Everyday items, the plates we chose together, photos from our trips, even the old coffee machine, had become sources of sorrow. Memories overwhelmed me each time I tried to find a moment of calm. The world I had built with Oliver had turned into ruins, and those ruins surrounded me from all sides. In this emptiness, I began to lose myself. I stopped going outside, avoided people, and barely ate, moving mechanically around the house. The only person who hadn't forgotten about me was Ellen. She called a few times, left messages, and eventually, one day, simply showed up at my door, without waiting for an invitation. Her visit was unexpected, yet it was a glimpse of reality that brought me back to my senses. "Harper, you can't go on like this," she said softly but firmly as she walked in and closed the door behind her. "You're disappearing. You look like a ghost." I looked at her, unable to find the words to explain my state. Ellen, always so attentive and sensitive, sat across from me, gazing directly into my eyes. Her face was full of care, and that triggered the tears I had been trying so hard to hold back. "Ellen, I've ruined everything," I whispered, not holding back the tears. "I destroyed everything I had. I don't know how to go on. I don't know who I am anymore." She listened without interrupting, then placed her hand on mine. "Harper, I know this is hard for you right now," she began, "but you need to understand. What happened was your choice. You wanted to fill a void, to understand yourself, but in the end," she paused, choosing her words, "you only deepened that emptiness." Her words hit me like a cold shower. I realized Ellen was right. I had tried to find in Leon what I felt was missing in my marriage, but in the end, I had destroyed both my marriage and myself. Deep down, I had always feared loneliness, feared being abandoned, feared not having enough love and warmth. And this fear, this emptiness, had driven me to seek comfort in something that was doomed from the start. "But Ellen, how do I live with this now?" I asked, feeling utterly drained. "The first thing you need to do, Harper," she said, "is to accept what happened and understand why you acted the way you did. You were trying to escape yourself, afraid to face your pain, and it led to the destruction around you. But now you have a chance to finally understand yourself, to be honest with yourself. It's difficult, but there is no other way." Her words felt like a revelation, something I hadn't been ready for, but that I needed. Ellen was right. My connection with Leon was an attempt to fill that emptiness that had always existed within me. In my fear of being unwanted, in my quest for love, I had taken a path of destruction instead of facing myself. After she left, I sat alone for a long time, reflecting on what it meant to live at peace with myself. For the first time, I understood that my solitude wasn't a punishment, but an opportunity, a chance to find inner peace, independent of others. And if I ever wanted to find love, happiness, and purpose again, I needed to first understand and accept myself. This thought, though painful, gave me the strength to start healing. I knew a long road lay ahead, but for the first time in many weeks, I felt that I could move forward, with caution, but with honesty toward myself. Several months had passed since my last conversation with Ellen, and I was slowly learning to live anew. The process was painful, yet cleansing. Each day, I tried to rediscover myself, to understand who I was and what I wanted my future to look like. I was no longer the same Harper, the woman who lived in fear, trapped in the expectation that something external would fill her life with meaning. I began to realize that the only person who could do that was me. One early morning, as I sat with a cup of coffee in my hands, my phone suddenly rang. It was Leon. Something tightened within me, but I answered, feeling ready for this conversation. His voice sounded soft, but there was a note of sadness in it. "Harper," he said after a brief pause, I didn't want to remind you of me, but I feel I need to. I need to say goodbye. I need you to know that all of this was my mistake, and I truly regret it. What happened should never have happened. I thought I could find meaning in these feelings, but in the end, I destroyed everything. Forgive me if you can. His words touched a part of my soul where remnants of pain and attachment still lingered, but this time, I didn't feel the old longing or bitterness. Instead, a sense of closure washed over me. I replied softly, but with certainty. Leon, I'm grateful to you for being part of my life. This experience, it was important for me. And though it brought pain, it gave me a chance to understand myself. We both made mistakes, and we both need to accept that. I wish you peace on your own path. The conversation was short, but after it, I felt as though another door to my past had closed. Leon became a part of my history, but he no longer defined my future. His goodbye freed me from the last of my bonds, and I realized I was ready to move forward. From that day on, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I started small, revitalized my home, got rid of things that reminded me of the past, and added more light and warmth to my surroundings. I decided to return to work, found activities that inspired me, and over time, new dreams emerged. In the process, I realized I had become someone else, stronger, more honest with myself, and more certain of what I needed. I no longer sought someone who could fill my inner emptiness, because I knew I was the only one who could do that. I learned to enjoy my own company, to value simple moments. Ellen remained by my side, and our conversations became a pillar of support and a reminder that I was not alone in my journey. Sometime later, one evening, I found myself in a small cafe, tucked away in a quiet alley, where everything exuded tranquility. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the passers-by and pondering my future. I felt peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't haunted by regrets or anxieties. I knew there were still many challenges ahead, but along with them, new possibilities awaited me. Suddenly, someone sat down at the nearby table. I glanced at the man. His expression was friendly, and as if sensing my gaze, he nodded and smiled. I returned the smile, feeling a light, pleasant flutter within me. This encounter didn't promise anything specific, but it held the promise of a possibility, the possibility of a new chapter beginning right here, right now.